really matters? That might be the most important question you can ask. So let's talk about it. Welcome to What Really Matters podcast, Everyday Spirituality with Karen Wyatt. And thanks so much for being here with me again on this podcast where I simply chat in a little monologue about spiritual issues that I'm looking at and working on myself, sometimes new things I've read or thought about, sometimes things I'm stumbling over and having issues with. And so today I have a new topic for you that I want to talk about, which is, are we going to die or not? And this came up because lately I've been seeing a lot of memes posted on various social media sites saying things like, we don't die, you will not die, death is not real. And I'm really curious about how the average person responds to reading posts like that. And on the other hand, here in our death positive space, we have various people who post things like, you might die tomorrow, you are going to die, death is coming for you. We're constantly trying to get people to wake up and recognize the fact that life is fleeting and short, and death is definitely the end, and you have to wake up and pay attention to that and be aware of your death. And as I thought about the contrasts in these two messages, the fact is they're not necessarily different. They're just talking about perhaps a different perspective on death and dying. But I can imagine those posts are received very differently by people who read them, who may be people who have not thought about their own end of life or given any thought to the fact that they will die someday. And that's what I wanted to talk about, these different perspectives, and even how we ourselves, we may have parts of ourselves that gravitate toward one message or another. And there is a split in a way in our society and in our consciousness right now around death and dying. And I became aware of it way back. It's now almost 10 years. This year I'm celebrating the 10-year anniversary of End of Life University, which is amazing to me. But 10 years ago, when I decided to start End of Life University, and I gave that name to a telesummit program that I created. I interviewed 17 people over the course of 1 week and posted all the interviews for people to watch. And so it was kind of an amazing event. And I think a little bit before its time, but something that I felt really excited and passionate about. And I came up with the name End of Life University, for one thing, because I wanted to convey that this is education that we all need to have. It's education about the end of life. And right away, I got some criticism from people in the death and dying movement who don't like the phrase end of life and feel that that is a euphemism for death, and were not happy that I chose End of Life University. Here's my mindset about that, though, and why I have chosen to continue to use End of Life University for the podcast and my website, and really this whole enterprise of things that I'm working on, is because in my mind, end of life actually describes the final stage of life, which includes death. But if I were to say Death University, I would be talking in my mind about the moment of death. And when I use the term end of life, for me, that is an umbrella term that incorporates aging, advanced aging, the dying process, becoming terminally ill with an illness, going through this entire process of the final journey of life, the last days of life, then death itself, and what comes after death. And so that could include funerals and memorial services and grief and bereavement for loved ones and whatever else we want to look at that might happen after death. So for me, end of life is a broad term that can incorporate all of those different phases that come before, during, and after death. And to simply say death, which I'm not afraid to say and not afraid of the word, and I realize we do have lots of euphemisms for death itself, but for me, saying end of life it's more of an umbrella term that defines this entire, I would call it the last stage of life, and after death as well. That's why I chose end of life in the first place, and why I continue to use it, even though I continue to get pushback from people who don't like that term, feel we should stop using it because it's a euphemism. It keeps people from thinking about and talking about death itself. It allows people to be in denial of death. I don't think so. I don't see it that way. But let me tell you about the pushback I got from an entirely different audience and another group of people who contacted me and said, how can you even use the term end of life? Because life does not end. Death is not real. No one is actually going to die. And you're perpetuating this idea that people die. And that's wrong, because we don't die. And so this was a group of people who I would say are in a higher consciousness category, who, when they are saying death isn't real, they're talking about the death of the spirit, the death of like the energetic aspect of us, which will continue on after the physical body dies. But that group of people, they were also mad at me for using end of life and saying, this is preposterous. How could you even use that term? It's so misleading. So here I was in the middle there, getting pushback from people on both sides who didn't like my choice. But in fact, that's what told me I'm on the right path, and I'm going to stay where I am. I'm going to stick with End of Life University. I like it. I know what it means. It says what I want it to say. And so when I refer to the end of life, I am talking about the end of this physical existence, which is the life that we know here on this planet, the ending of this life and everything that comes with it, the whole process leading up to it and whatever follows after the death. So again, I stand by it. End of life for me describes all of those phases and stages, and I can fit everything underneath that umbrella. All the things that I talk about, all the interviews that I do, for me, fall under that umbrella of end of life. And so if I were to talk only about death, I feel like that would be more limiting. If I talked primarily about grief, that is a different subject as well, but both of them fit really well under the end of life umbrella for me. So that's why I have stuck with it. And I'm still repping End of Life University, and I still really like that phrase for myself. And because I understand what it means, I know that I need to explain to other people what I mean when I use it. And of course, I have over and over again to various people who've questioned me about it. But again, let's look at the death and dying movement feels very strongly that our society is in denial of death and the dying process. And that's very true. That's what inspired me to want to do my podcast in the first place and to start writing books about it, because our society has been removed somewhat from awareness of death. And many people go throughout their days not thinking about or considering the fact that they will die someday. And those of us who have awakened to that fact and who have really looked into our own mortality and even celebrate our mortality and the fact that life is short and fleeting, those of us who have done that work can pretty much stand up and say, that's the best thing I've ever learned, because now life has so much value for me. Life is precious. And I cherish every moment, and I make the most of every moment of the life that I have, because I know it's fleeting and I won't have it forever. And this realization for me is a tremendous gift. It's amazing. And the true reason that I want to share conversations about death and open people's eyes to it is so that they can also feel the peace and the joy of life, the deeper joy that comes amidst the pain and suffering that we must bear as mortals who, in our physical bodies, will experience aging, the dying process, and death. And so I believe that there's tremendous treasure to be gleaned from this realization and recognition of the death of the physical body. But at the same time, I also do believe that there is a perpetuation of spirit, of our consciousness and our spirit after we die. I do not necessarily know how that takes place or what it looks like, but I have a sense, and I have witnessed it myself when I've been with people who are dying, that something happens, some essence separates itself from the physical body. And for me, I refer to it as the soul, which I differentiate from the body-mind ego. And the body-mind ego does die. And as that death is taking place, I have witnessed what I can only call soul or spirit or consciousness or energy or divine love, something separating itself from the body and being released. And so from my experience and within my beliefs, I do believe that our consciousness, to some degree or another, or in some form or another, persists after death. And whether or not that consciousness retains any individuality, I don't know. I don't know if, say, if my individual soul or consciousness will simply dissolve into divine love and disappear, or if some essence of my uniqueness or my individuality will be retained. I do not know that. But I understand when people say we don't die. I understand that there is a part of us that doesn't die. There's a part of us that separates from the dying body, mind, ego that will go on in some capacity or another. And so when people insist we don't die, there is no death, I understand that they're talking about that phenomenon. And I have witnessed it. I sense it, I'm aware of it, and I believe that there's a part of us that does not die. However, I also believe that one of the most important parts of our journey here, because yes, we are spirit to one degree, but we are spirit who has taken on physical form and come to this planet to live out a lifetime in a physical body with a mind and an ego, and that there is a purpose behind living here, existing here, by incarnating here in a physical form that will die someday. And that part of the lesson that we came here as spiritual beings to learn is about the death of the physical body and how to transcend that, how to navigate it, how to live through this dying process that we must experience, and that going through that process is essential, that contains wisdom, that the soul, our spiritual self, our divine self needs to have. That dying process is essential. And so on the one hand, when people simply say, you won't die, death isn't real, no one dies, don't be afraid, I feel that they're discounting the importance of this journey within this physical body and all that the dying process entails, the suffering and the pain, also the joy within it, the love, the beauty, the peace that can occur during this dying process. I feel that all of those aspects of the death of the physical body are important, not to be overlooked, not to be shunned or brushed away or diminished in any way. And so when someone makes a meme that says, death isn't real, you won't die, don't worry, it feels like they're giving short shrift, if you will, to the value and the beauty of death itself, death for the physical body. And it feels as though they're refusing to look at it. And so even those individuals who were upset with me for using the term end of life despise the word end and do not want to be reminded in any way that there is an ending to this existence that we have right here and right now. Their focus is all on the survival of consciousness, and they're ignoring the physical death part of that equation and how it happens. And so I feel that that is a mistake, to simply focus on the persistence of consciousness after death, which obviously they believe in and they have witnessed or experienced, they have knowledge of in some way or another, which is beautiful and wonderful. But to simply focus on that, and as a response to ignore physical death, I think is to leave out in many ways the most important part of this process. And here's why I think it happens: because the ego is the part of us that is most afraid of death, that does not want to look at death or experience death. The ego is terrified of its own death. The ego is thrilled and happy to hold on to any message that says, you won't die, don't worry, death isn't real. Death doesn't exist. There is no end to life. The ego is delighted to grasp a hold of that message and carry it. And I think that is what's happening sometimes for people of higher consciousness who refuse to look at death and want to wipe it out of their awareness. It's the ego within them that is experiencing terror around the idea of physical death. And so that situation alone belies the steps that are necessary in order to fully transcend and to actually get to higher consciousness, because confronting the ego and making the ego aware of and accepting of the idea of death is part of that process. I've talked a little bit about that, about the inward arc, the inward journey each of us must go on, which involves becoming aware of the fact that we will die and facing it and requiring our egos to look at that and our egos to give up any illusions of being immortal. And so when people cling too tightly to the idea that we won't die, I believe it's the ego in disguise hiding within that action that doesn't want to look at death and that doesn't want to allow death to be part of their discussion of life. On the other hand, there are people in our death and dying realm who fixate on the death of the physical body and honestly don't believe that there is anything about us that will persist after the physical body dies. And for many people, and this is often people at the rational level who just simply cannot perceive and don't believe that there is a consciousness within us that will persist after we die. And they don't care. It doesn't matter to them. They've accepted we die and that's it. And that will be the end of everything. And I respect that. We're each on our own journey spiritually here, figuring things out as we go. And life itself is our teacher. Whatever life brings us that's really the curriculum we have to learn these lessons from. Some of us some of us may have been exposed to more death and more grief. We may have witnessed dying. We may be holding it closer to our hearts because of the experiences we have. We may have gleaned wisdom from death already that informs us and has taught us a lot. And I put myself in that category for the most part, because of personal experiences, because of working in hospice as well. But others may not have gleaned the wisdom from death, I guess I could call it. Other people may not have had experiences in life that have led them to recognize or to see that there is a consciousness about us that will persist. And that's fine. We each have to be wherever we are, and we have to accept one another and our differing beliefs, our differing perspectives on life and death itself. Again, based on what we've experienced and what life has shown us. Some people have religious beliefs that they turn to that inform them and their beliefs about what will happen after they die. And in that case, that tends to be an external belief that has been taught to them by the leaders and the dogma of their religion. And they cling to those beliefs because that is what they're able to see from the level at which they are, because they ascribe to a religion, they embrace what the religion teaches, and that may overshadow even personal experiences that they have. They may discount personal experience because they don't value it as much as they value the wisdom literature and the teachings that have been brought to them through their religion. And that's also fine. Each of us, as I said, we're on our own path. We're figuring this out as we go. And when I share with you what I believe, I'm sharing it not as a way of saying to you, this is the correct thing to believe or this is right. I'm only sharing where I am right now, what life has brought to me and what I've learned through my experience, not to say, this is the right way to think and the right way to look at it. Only telling you this is where I am right now. I might completely change my mind over the next year. Who knows what else will happen or what else I will be shown and experience. And of course, each of us will die. Our physical bodies will die at some point. We will have that experience at some point, and we will each learn something from our own process as we go through death and dying. So this won't be a mystery to us forever. There will be an opportunity at the end in order to learn more about what death really is and what it really means. So for now, we're making our best assumptions and based on whatever we experience. But I wanted to share with you just a couple of quotes to think about. And I find this way of looking at things to be helpful. Eckhart Tolle wrote, "Death is a stripping away of all that is not you. The secret of life is to die before you die and find that there is no death." So I like what he's writing about death itself, that death is actually a process that can take place throughout life as we learn and experience hardships. And as he said, the stripping away of things that are not real, that are not part of our true selves. And so I have witnessed this happening during the dying process for many of our patients who, have a long, prolonged dying process and experience loss on a daily basis. Every day there's something new that is lost, something they're not able to do anymore, a function that they no longer retain. And so there are cumulative losses that occur during the dying process. And this is, as Tolle described, a stripping away. It's really stripping away all the pretenses and illusions of the ego. And it's forcing the ego to see none of this is important. None of this matters. None of this is who I really am. And even you, ego, are not who I really am. You are the vehicle who has carried my true essence during this lifetime. And so there is this process of allowing all these parts of ourselves to die, and including allowing the ego to die to its illusions and pretenses. And when we have died in that regard, and we have become our truest selves, our highest consciousness, then, Tolle writes, you will find that there is no death. Again, this is what people are talking about when they make those memes that say there is no death. But still, there is physical death. The body will die. And we just have to make it so clear in our minds when we talk this way that there is no death for consciousness or spirit or soul, whatever you want to talk about. There is death for the body, mind, ego. But I really like this idea of dying before you die. And that's one of the reasons those of us in this death positive movement talk a lot now about death and facing it and looking at it and preparing for it, because that's part of the process of allowing ourselves to die before we get to the point of physical death. So we've already done the work of it. So this sentiment of dying before you die, it's something that Rumi, the Sufi poet and philosopher, talked about. It's recognized in Buddhism. As I said, Eckhart Tolle wrote about it. But I learned also that there was an epigram on an Orthodox Christian monastery on Mount Athos in Greece. And this epigram says a very similar message. If you die before you die, then you won't die when you die. And I like this, I think, better than any of the other ways of saying it. Die before you die, and then your higher self, your consciousness won't die when your physical body dies. So because that statement acknowledges that you will still die. This body, mind, ego of yours will die, but there is part of you that will not die. And so I think that's the best way of acknowledging those two truths as I see it, the two things that I hold on to and believe in. And so for me, you won't find me posting things that say, you're not going to die, don't worry, there is no death, because I think that is a message that the ego latches onto and uses to prevent itself from learning about death and dying. And I don't want to perpetuate that. I understand people who write that are hoping to soothe people who are afraid of death and fearful. And that they're trying to reassure people, don't worry, there's a part of you, your consciousness isn't going to die, and that's who you really are, your consciousness. I understand that, but without the further explanation that, oh, but wait, your body, mind, ego will die. Those parts of you will die. Without that further explanation, I feel like those memes, I feel like they fall flat and they may not accomplish what they would like to accomplish. They perhaps accomplish the opposite. They may be helping the ego to grasp even tighter and to go into even deeper denial about death and dying. So that's where I'm sitting right now with this discussion. And as I said, I'm holding tight with End of Life University. After 10 years, I still stand by that name. I still cherish it, actually. And I think it says exactly what I want it to say, even though pretty much nobody else seems to like it. But I'm all right with that. And that's what makes me, as I said, that's what makes me think it's perfect. There are people on both sides of this discussion who don't like the term. And then I realize, okay, that's just right then. I'm right in the middle, in a good balance here. And I'm holding on to both of these realities that physical life will end. Our higher consciousness can go on. And the more we embrace death and prepare ourselves for it and think about it and allow it and open ourselves to this process of stripping away and allowing to die the parts of us that are not real or authentic, the better off we will be when our physical body does reach its end and the end of physical life comes. So I hope these ramblings of mine are interesting to you, and I'd love to know how you feel about it, how you feel about death. Is it going to come or not? And are you preparing for it or not? And until next week, remember that we're here for love. So face your fear, be ready for whatever life brings you next, and love each and every moment of your very precious life here on planet Earth. Bye-bye.